Brantley Foster has just graduated from Kansas State University and tells his parents all those years in college are going to start paying off, that he is going to make lots of money at his new job in New York, and that he will come back to Kansas in his own private jet. Brantley arrives in New York and gets to his new apartment, telling all creatures with more than 2 legs to stay away. He arrives at his new job, but his boss immediately tells him he's fired due to a hostile takeover, like 90% of all employees. Disappointed, Brantley begins searching for another job, but wherever he goes, he's either over or underqualified, or hasn't enough experience. A few days later, he talks to his mother, explaining he is doing great, having a nice office and a gorgeous secretary. She asks him if people are nice in New York, and as he replies they are, a robbery occurs. Hearing gunshots, his mother asks what's going on, and Brantley says it's Miami Vice on TV. She tells him not to forget to call Uncle Howard before they end the call. As he gets home later, he picks out a note with Uncle Howard's number. Next, Brantley arrives at a big company called the Pemrose Corporation. He asks a secretary to see Howard Prescott, and she asks what he wants to see him about. Brantley answers he's Howard's nephew. She explains Mr. Prescott doesn't like surprise visits, but will notify him. They hear an angry man yelling to employees he will have their heads mounted on his wall. Brantley asks if it is his uncle, which it is. She goes in, and comes back saying Howard has 2 minutes. Brantley gets right to the point, saying he needs a job. Howard explains they have 30,000 people working in this building alone, and asks what he can do for them with his little experience. Brantley asks Howard to think back to his first job, how crushed he was when they asked about his experience, and tells Howard he can do anything if he only gets a chance. Howard tells his secretary to call personnel to give Brantley a job, and the secretary congratulates him. Next, Brantley meets his new boss, who grumpily says he shouldn't wear a suit. A guy called Melrose is then tasked to show him around. Melrose explains he will deliver mail twice a day, which takes about 30 minutes, even though their boss thinks it takes 2 hours. He continues explaining nobody knows what anybody else is doing in the company. Brantley bids people good morning, but they don't respond, and Melrose tells him he can't talk to suits, which Brantley thinks is ridiculous. Melrose sees a man crying in an office and explains he just found out he was fired, but that the mailroom already knew about it last week. Brantley thinks it's weird that the company has survived with such a bad structure. After a couple days, Brantley discovers the company is totally screwed, explaining to Melrose there's no chain of command. He goes to the company archives, and over a couple of days, he works hard, researching the company history, finances, and corporate structure. He notices a beautiful woman working at the company one day, and asks Melrose who she is. Her name is Christy, but Melrose says she's a suit and that he should forget about her. As Brantley is sorting mail later, his boss suddenly gets a phone call with a request to drive an executive's wife home. Brantley is tasked to do it, and drives the woman home, whose name is Vera. She seems upset, and Brantley asks what it is. She tells him she's had a bad day, and on top of it all, her husband is screwing somebody at the office. She thinks out loud, saying her husband looks twice as good as the day they married, and she looks twice as old. Brantley then comments he'd hope he could wake up every morning besides a woman as beautiful as her at her husband's age. All of a sudden, she becomes crazy about him, starting to put on perfume and behave interested in him, and Brantley starts feeling uncomfortable. They eventually arrive at her big mansion, and Brantley brings her bags inside. She gives him a drink in the backyard, and suddenly takes his hand and runs down to the pool. Vera calls the company and says Brantley will stay and do some work in her garden. But the next thing we know, the two are jumping into the pool together, and start playing around. Afterwards, she says she will make sure he is promoted, but Brantley says he will work his way up on his own. Suddenly, they hear her husband coming home, and Brantley is shocked to see it's his Uncle Howard, and Vera laughs realizing she's his aunt. Brantley quickly puts on clothes and hastily leaves. As Howard enters, he fails to sweep her off her feet. Next day at work, he sees Christy, and starts thinking about her. As he makes his normal mail delivery round, he enters the office of the employee that got fired. He sits down in the chair, dreaming, and suddenly the phone rings. Brantley hesitates, but then answers. The man calling thinks he's talking to the guy that got canned, explaining they got a problem in distribution where a trucking company won't supply trucks. Brantley suggests telling the trucking company they will find someone else to supply them if they won't, and the man likes his gutsy idea. Meanwhile on the roof, Howard and other executives are discussing that the company's stocks have suddenly dropped in value, and somebody is buying a ton of them, which means the company is ripe for a hostile takeover. Howard tells them all to cut costs in their departments to get cash to boost stock support. Next day, Brantley puts on his suit, and as he heads to the empty office, he tries to avoid Uncle Howard in the corridor and hides in a room, which apparently is Christy's office. Being stressed, he makes some weird comments about how good her office looks. She says she has a lot of work to do, and bids him good morning and goodbye. He slowly leaves her office, and is disappointed at himself for handling the conversation so badly. Brantley gets to the office and makes a call, saying his name is Carlton Whitfield, a new employee, and requests a secretary. He changes clothes and makes his mail delivery round. His boss suspects he is up to something because he didn't punch in. While changing back to his suit later, his new secretary enters his office, and is shocked to see him without clothes. She introduces herself as Jean, and Brantley tries to explain why he has no clothes on, saying he felt warm. Brantley then puts on his clothes, asks his secretary to get him material he needs, after which he gets his name signed. He walks around among suits and bids everyone good morning, and this time they bid him good morning as well. Later on, he goes to the executive lounge, where he sees Christy. He walks up to her, but she doesn't have time for him. He follows her, and picks up a pen she drops, saying he is trying to be friendly. She says she is sorry and introduces herself. They are all summoned to a conference room to discuss some really bad news. Brantley asks Christy out for dinner, but she is booked all week. One executive asks who he is, and Brantley answers his name is Carlton Whitfield, a new employee. The meeting begins, and they explain a person called Donald Davenport has acquired 5% of the company's stocks, attempting a hostile takeover. One executive remarks everyone was fired last time Donald took over a company. They are told Howard wants them to cut costs, and Christy suggests closing down several of the company's distribution centers. Brantley says that's a bad idea, explaining it will put a strain on the company's cash position and lower the company's innate value. Brantley says they must be bold and expand so that the company becomes so damn valuable no one would want to sell their stocks to Donald, and then they can counter Donald's hostile takeover. They all start talking at the same time, and after a while one comments the meeting is going nowhere, saying Howard's command stands, that they have to cut costs. Brantley's boss thinks something is going on, and says he will be on him like a rash. Next, Brantley is at home researching, when he starts hearing his neighbors jumping around in bed through the thin walls. He begins directing to their sounds like it's music, and takes a drink. That night, Brantley can't sleep, and Vera knocks on the door, saying she heard him call her telepathically. He lets her in, and she says her father lived like this before he founded Penrose. She tells him her husband is working late tonight, but says she has no idea with who. Simultaneously, Howard is seen with Christy. She mentions Carlton Whitfield, and Howard remarks he never hired any Whitfield, figuring Donald Davenport has planted a spy, and tells her to get close to Whitfield and find out what he is up to. Next day, Brantley brings a briefcase to work, and stops the elevator on his way to the office to change into a suit. He starts it and gets off, getting to his office where he asks Jean to make some copies for him, after which he runs back to the elevator, and then stops the elevator again to change clothes. Jean comments she's tired of it being stuck and a maintenance guy manages to start it. Suddenly, Jean sees Brantley without clothes again. Meanwhile, Christy steals notes from his office and gives it to Howard, saying she's out of this spy business. In a meeting with executives, Brantley arrives late, and soon after, Howard drops in to get to meet Mr. Whitfield. Brantley quickly pretends he gets a nosebleed and runs out. Howard asks who that was, and gets the answer it was Whitfield, and runs after him. Brantley hides, and sees two employees making out, totally ignoring him. That evening, Christy sees Brantley working, and checks on him. She asks what all the notes are, and he explains it's the heart of an idea she hated. She wants him to convince her his idea is the right one. They stay up late, discussing their different views, when suddenly Christy's blood sugar drops and she asks if he wants food. While eating, a waitress hears Brantley's idea of expanding, and she remarks expanding is a positive reaction to the universe, saying cutting back is a negative force. She also comments they make a good-looking couple, saying they should go together. Later, as they are walking, she reveals to Brantley that she checked and confirmed he's right on some of his points, saying she's trying to stay open to his ideas. Brantley comments a lot of people start out the way they have quarreled. As the sun rises, he asks who his competition is. She answers it's just a guy, but mentions the man she's been seeing is married. Brantley asks how she can be so incredibly beautiful, and kisses her. The two end up in bed together at Brantley's apartment. Next day, Howard is madder than hell that she didn't answer his calls during the weekend, and Christy tells him over the phone she can't be involved outside the office anymore, and Howard hangs up. Later he enters her office, saying he broke up with Vera for her. They eat together, and Howard explains Donald Davenport is offering to take over the company, and that he's inviting all key personnel to spend the weekend at his house, saying he needs her there too. He then asks who she was with last night, and she reveals it was Whitfield, but assures him it was all about business. Brantley is stopped by his boss, who says he is watching him. As Brantley later meets Christy and sees she's upset, asking what's going on, Brantley's boss sees him, and a chase begins. Brantley runs down some stairs, and his boss follows closely behind him. He runs up some other stairs, telling Christy how great she looks, before running down the stairs again. As his boss comes running, Melrose lifts a cable on the ground, making him trip and fall down the stairs. Brantley soon after gets to his office, seeing Howard is there. Howard asks what he's doing there, and Brantley explains he is trying to find Mr. Whitfield to deliver mail. He asks Brantley to take some papers to his office while he quickly checks Whitfield's work. In Howard's office, Brantley is surprised to see Vera, who's singing, saying she's in the mood for love because he is close. She starts to harass him and says she will eat him for lunch. Brantley tries to explain there is someone else in his life, but is ignored, and suddenly, Howard walks into the room, asking what is going on. Brantley tries to explain, saying he walked in and saw this beautiful woman, and got so surprised learning she was his aunt that he fainted, and then Vera adds that she rushed to his aid, after which he walked in on them. Howard says he has a million things to do and wants them to go, and Vera asks if Brantley can come to their house over the weekend, which Howard thinks is a great idea. Later, Howard has summoned Brantley, saying he has noticed Vera has taken an instant liking for him, and wants him to keep Vera occupied as much as possible over the weekend, so that he can meet another girl he has invited. Having no choice, Brantley accepts. Next, Vera meets Brantley at their home, kissing him behind a wall, and when people greet him as Carlton Whitfield. She asks him why they call him that, and he briefly explains, and she remarks his quality of surprising her is very attractive. Meanwhile, Howard meets Christy, grabs her, and she tells him angrily to let her go. Later, Brantley surprises her when she's wandering around in the garden, and they start fooling around. A while later, Howard explains to his executives he looked through their report on proposed cutbacks and is satisfied, but then Christy exclaims she thinks Whitfield is right and this report is wrong, and a fierce discussion begins. Simultaneously, Vera introduces Brantley to 3 of the richest men in New York, letting him explain his proposition for how Pemrose Corporation could expand and become much more valuable. They seem to all take an interest in his ideas, and like them very much, and other people start listening, all while Howard and his executives continue having a wild discussion. Later, Howard walks up to Brantley and asks to talk to him, asking him if he knew Whitfield is there. Brantley says he thinks Whitfield left, but Howard tells him someone saw him talking to Christy just a few minutes ago. He asks Brantley to stay close to Christy and keep Whitfield away from her, and Brantley promises. She asks what that was all about, and is surprised to hear Howard told him to stay close to her. That night, Brantley gets out of bed to head to Christy's room. Howard gets up as well, and so does Christy. They all start sneaking around in the house, and soon Vera also gets up. Brantley gets to Christy's room, but is confused to find she has stolen some of his notes. Simultaneously, Vera gets to Brantley's room, but he's not there. Suddenly, Howard tries to get into Christy's room with a key, and enters. Thinking it's Christy in the bed, he starts explaining how much he loves her. He asks if she wants to marry him, but then Brantley appears saying he'd like to beat the shit out of him. Christy returns and goes into the bathroom, and immediately after Vera appears. Howard asks why Brantley is in Christy's bed, using his real name to ask him, and Brantley is angry Christy took his notes. Christy is confused by Howard calling him Brantley and not Carlton Whitfield, and Vera is angry at Howard because he has been screwing Christy. Suddenly Howard manages to figure out that Brantley is Whitfield, and Brantley confirms it's true. Vera threatens to call her lawyer, and Brantley and Christy become angry at each other, after which Brantley leaves and Christy is devastated. Next, Jean is telling Brantley she will miss seeing him without his pants on, and all his energy he had. Melrose remarks on his success, how he worked his way from the mailroom to his own office with a view of Manhattan, and that he did more in 2 months than most do in a lifetime. On his way out of the building, he runs into Christy, who has also been fired, and they have a sassy conversation with each other. They take the same elevator down together, becoming angry at each other. When some executives are about to enter, they see Brantley and Christy kissing, saying the elevator is full. Next, Christy says they could never pull his idea off, but he assures him they can. He asks Jean and Melrose for help, which they gladly do. Howard is seen in a meeting with Donald Davenport, where Donald says most people will be fired, but that those who have been helpful, like Howard and his executives, will get to stay as long as they want. Suddenly, Brantley and Christy burst into the room. Brantley says he is there on behalf of the employees in the mailroom, all the secretaries, and the female executives in the company, telling Davenport the merger is good for Pemrose, but that he will become a management problem if the merger is performed. Donald demands Howard get them out, but then Christy starts explaining they have bought 5% of the stocks in his own company, Davenport Enterprises, and are buying him out. She then lets 3 gentlemen into the room, who Brantley explains are his financial advisors. Brantley then introduces the daughter of the founder and the new chairman of the company, Vera. Vera walks up to Howard, telling him he's running her dad's company into the ground, telling him to get out of the chair, and that he's fired. Shocked, he says she can't do that, but she responds she owns 50.1% of the voting stock and can do anything she wants. Vera gets security to escort Howard out, and Brantley takes over the meeting. Afterwards, Brantley asks Christy if she's ever been to Kansas, saying he figured they'd take the Pemrose private jet to go see his parents. Suddenly, Jean sees the elevator is stuck, and exclaims she can't believe the elevator is stuck again. The end.